As a live service game, Crystal Dynamics has promised to periodically release new playable characters for Marvel's Avengers post-launch. And on December 8th, 2020, the Taking Aim DLC brought us our first post-launch playable character, Kate Bishop. So on today's video, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on the Kate Bishop Taking Aim DLC, and maybe I'll learn a little bit about time travel along the way. I don't know, let's see.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another carrotscraps video, and by another, I mean the 58th. Over the years, we've seen the time travel story taken on in various different types of media. We've seen it in movies like Terminator. It's interesting that I mentioned Terminator in both of my Avengers reviews so far. Extremely popular TV shows like Doctor Who have been telling stories like this for decades, and we've even seen it in other Marvel games like Spider-Man: Edge of Time. But now Crystal Dynamics has decided to bring time travel to the Marvel Avengers video game. How did they do? Well, before we can talk about the gameplay, I'd like to talk about the story. The story of Taking Aim has the current Avengers team run into the spunky and sarcastic Kate Bishop. We learn that the Avengers have history with Kate, but that she doesn't forgive the team for disappearing after A-Day. Kate reveals that she's searching for her former mentor, Clint Barton, who is somehow mixed up in AIM's current plans. It turns out that AIM, now led by Monica Rappaccini, is experimenting with a new invention called the Time Bridge. Well, technically it's not called the Time Bridge, but we're calling it the Time Bridge. And that she is cooperating with her future self to finish work on a piece of technology that future Monica couldn't finish in her timeline. The Avengers, with the help of Hank Pym, attempt to build their own time bridge to go further back in time and stop Monica from sending Clint Barton to the future. In the end, Kate Bishop and whatever Avengers you choose go on a trip through time and end up saving Clint from an apocalyptic future timeline. And after returning to the Chimera, Clint attempts to describe this future timeline before passing out, leaving the DLC on a big cliffhanger. So my big positive for the game's main campaign was characterization. While I wasn't taken with the game's plot, I loved the way the characters acted and communicated with one another. It's kind of the complete opposite with this DLC though. I really like the plot events of Taking Aim. The time travel stuff is a little fuzzy and convoluted, but ultimately it's weird, it's fun, and that makes it interesting to me. Like for example, when Kate tells Hank that they need to build a second time bridge and go back in time to stop people from using the time bridge too much, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Hank acts like it's this genius idea, but I think it's kind of just an okay idea. But that being said, building a second time bridge is exactly the kind of fun that I want in my DLC stories. It's just so off the wall. But on the other hand, the characterization, I'm not as into. Now the characterization isn't awful, but Kate is a little bit too much of a Bart Simpson for my liking. She's just like way too cool for school and like full of one-liners in my opinion. And that can be really fun, but it needs to be done right, and I wasn't necessarily endeared by her snark in this DLC. On the other hand, I really appreciated the more intimate scenes where she let her guard down, like when she's being transparent with Steve Rogers, or when she's worried about Clint's well-being. Even her frustration with the Avengers is a really admirable trait. I think these are all the best moments for Kate Bishop as a character. Now, is her snark the worst thing in the world? No, absolutely not. Honestly, her snark ranks equal to Tony Stark's one-liners in the game. Occasionally lame, but overall very harmless, especially when in the presence of really strong character moments. I think in the whole story, my favorite scenes are with Kate Bishop and Tony, or Kate Bishop and Steve. These scenes just make me feel like there's something else underneath the surface, and I like that feeling. Something I did think was weirdly lacking from the story in the DLC was Kamala Khan. Kate is a new addition to the team who has some very interesting opinions on the Avengers, and she's relatively close in age to Kamala Khan. So I thought it was really weird that Kamala and Kate really didn't have a scene where the two were introduced to one another. They did occasionally exchange words, but I expected a little bit more of an introduction, especially since Kamala was essentially the main character of the main campaign. I just thought this was a really odd omission, and I thought it would have been cool to see it in the DLC. On a similar note, I think it would have been interesting to see a parallel drawn between Kate Bishop's mentorship with Clint and Kamala's mentorship with the Avengers. I think Kamala being taught by the Avengers is one of the main themes of the campaign, and I would have liked to seen that explored more with Kate. Although maybe we'll get this more in Clint's DLC. Overall, when it comes to the new campaign, I was really excited to be playing through a weird and wacky time travel story. But all this talk about time travel really started to get me thinking. If I had access to a time bridge, what would I use it for? This honestly kept me up at night and delayed the release of this review. What could I use a time bridge for? What information from the future could I use to go back and make my past better? After long consideration, there was only one possible option that I thought was viable, and that option was to go back to 1999 and save a priceless piece of artwork. A piece of artwork that I illustrated in kindergarten, and a piece of artwork that was destroyed mercilessly by my classmate Todd. If you're unfamiliar with my personal childhood, allow me to give you the cliff notes. Essentially, I was in class and drew the best picture of an anthill that I had ever seen, and that I would ever see. And as a fool, I decided to step away from my artwork to use the restroom. When I returned, Todd had destroyed my artwork, and had crudely illustrated a picture of Batman over my ant farm drawing. This day has lived in my memories in infamy, but by utilizing the time bridge, I can go back and stop this from ever happening. I mean, it's either that or I let this go, you know what I mean? And I just don't want to let this go. This is very important to me. Anyway, let's move on. So let's talk about gameplay, and by that I mean the new gameplay of a new character. Taking Aim's greatest contribution to Marvel's Avengers is of course Kate Bishop, the new playable character. She is the student of Clint Barton, the original Hawkeye, and as such, she is very skilled with a bow and arrow, as well as a katana-like sword. I would just call it a katana, but it seems slightly altered, so I don't want to take the chance and mischaracterize a katana. She has multiple types of arrows, like a precision shot, an arrow that allows for crowd control, and a demolition arrow that explodes on impact. But that's not all. Most interestingly, Kate has a number of borrowed tech abilities that are somewhat, if not entirely, new to the character. Through stolen aim tech, Kate Bishop can also teleport short distances and in various other ways, as well as discharge powerful energy attacks. And of course, these abilities can be expanded upon and changed in the further progression of the skill tree. Now let's talk about my specific thoughts on the gameplay. So I've had to record and rewrite this segment a couple of times at this point, and it's because I'm honestly very conflicted about my feelings on Kate Bishop. When she first came out, I was originally captivated by her gameplay, but because of bugs that we'll talk about later, and a lack of polish in the overall character's design, I felt disincentivized to play as her. Which was really sad to me because initially I really enjoyed the way she played. But after returning to Kate to finish my review of the DLC, I've found myself falling in love with her gameplay again. Especially with the further progression of her skill tree and the new gear that I've acquired, I really like playing as Kate. But before I continue gushing about the character, I want to talk about why I think she lacks polish. So again, part of what kept me from really loving Kate was the amount of bugs that I ran into in this DLC. I ran into more bugs during this DLC than any of my 3 playthroughs of the main campaign. And yes, I've played the main campaign 3 times now. I'm very sorry. But when I say that Kate lacks a certain polish that I think the other characters have, I'm specifically talking about her teleportation ability. Her teleportation ability, which I think is super unique and super valuable to the character. Teleportation is a lot of fun to play around with, and it's definitely the main draw of the character. But even though the novelty of teleportation is enjoyable, I do think that it's a little rough around the edges in execution. I just felt like too frequently after teleporting, I would either end up in front of the wrong enemy or attach myself to the wrong ledge. I'd say maybe 3 out of every 5 teleportations, I'd feel kind of confused. I also felt like sometimes I wouldn't teleport in the time frame that I thought I should, leading to certain deaths that I didn't think was necessarily fair. And so that kind of discouraged me from wanting to use the character. But now that I've returned to Kate, I feel like I'm more discouraged from teleporting in general than all of Kate Bishop's gameplay. So basically, I think the teleportation ability is really fun and super important to the character, but I also think that it's not perfect in its execution and that it could be a lot better. One more thing about Kate that I really loved about the DLC was that she allowed me to experiment with my exploration. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, one of her heroic abilities allows her to use an arrow that when fired can teleport Kate wherever it lands. This is a really interesting idea in battle, but it is a perfect idea when exploring. I was trying to get to some location to get into a gearbox and couldn't figure my way up, and I was about to give up when it dawned on me that I didn't need to save my heroic ability for combat. I could use it here to solve this puzzle. And so I aimed upward and essentially skipped the entire platforming puzzle. I loved this moment so much. Now, it's not like this happened a lot, but when it did, it reminded me of the potential this game has. I would love to see more moments like this in the future of the game. When you realize only a certain character can go somewhere, or that you can arrive somewhere more easily with a different character's ability. Either way, you know how I feel about this. I welcome any and all new platforming challenges and innovations. One of my other criticisms about Kate is, as an archer, I do feel like there could be a little more incentive to play Kate as a distanced fighter, but most of the time I really do enjoy bombarding enemies from afar with my explosive arrows. My explosive gamma arrows. Oh my goodness, I'm so proud of them. But again, currently, I really love playing as the character. After revisiting the character and really making her my own with my customization, I feel very comfortable saying she is in my top 3, coming after Black Widow and Captain America. For a while, she was in this paradoxical place where I really enjoyed playing as her, so she was a top tier character, but also the lack of polish pushed her closer to the bottom. But after returning to her for this review, I feel very confident in my opinion. Now, I still think the teleportation can be a little wonky at times, but overall, she is fantastic. Her teleportation is unique and fun, and her weapons are really empowering to the player. And especially as somebody who is not necessarily a Kate Bishop fan, or someone who was asking for an archer to be added to the game, I'm very surprised at how much I love this character. Although they did give her a sword, and as longtime viewers know, I'm a big fan of swords and characters who wield them, especially when they're katanas or katana-like swords, so that definitely helped in winning me over. So when it comes to the design and addition of a new character, I think they did a really great job. Something else I found interesting about the DLC was the tachyon energy surges. Occasionally, because of time travel shenanigans, a surge of energy would discharge and slow everything down. This would happen on certain missions and also at the new outpost. And I really liked this idea. The problem is, I would have loved this as a new temporary gameplay mechanic. And it's not a mechanic at all. It's really just set dressing for the story. And that's super disappointing. Separating the gameplay of the DLC from the gameplay of the main campaign would be a really smart idea in my opinion. And managing your combat while anticipating slow motion inducing power surges sounds like an interesting mechanic that could really add some challenge to the game, or at least make the DLC memorable from a gameplay perspective. But sadly, these slow motion surges were more for plot reasons than gameplay reasons. I feel like it's a huge missed opportunity to not play more with the time travel story and implement the plot as a gameplay element. Think Titanfall 2, where you're switching between two different timelines to platform correctly. Those kind of ideas would be really cool in a story about time travel. So with that in mind, here's a general idea for future DLC updates in Avengers. Why not introduce a new enemy type with every big DLC campaign? They can still be an AIM foot soldier, but wouldn't it be cool if we got a new AIM enemy that played differently and forced you to adjust your playstyle? The trailer could even hype up this new enemy and it would make players excited to see them. Maybe the new DLC could add a boomerang enemy or an enemy that charges at the player. I mean, just play a Mario game and steal some enemy types from that franchise. And the great thing is, you don't even need new enemy assets, just give an old robot a new paint job. What's important is their gameplay mechanics being new. I just think it would add a lot to these DLC expansions if the game's gameplay was slightly changed forever after the release of the DLC campaign. Moving on, in theory, the second best part of the DLC should be the new supervillain. So let's talk about the new villain that Taking Aim brings to the game, the Super Adaptoid. The final fight of the DLC pits your team against a menacing enemy that mimics the Avengers' abilities. Their face looks like Iron Man, and they even carry a replica version of Mjolnir and Cap's shield. I don't know, I guess they're like a cosplayer or something. I don't know. Now, it's really cool to see the Super Adaptoid from the comics taken so seriously as a threat. While fighting them, you can really feel the pressure. They rush towards you, causing a panic, and they're able to dodge your attacks. I really love the dodge because it can feel really frustrating when you miss an attack that was supposed to hit them, especially when it's a heroic ability that you were trying to aim. At the end of the day, the fight is okay, but the enemy's character model looks fantastic. However, there is one problem. For some reason, the Super Adaptoid doesn't reappear in the villain sectors, meaning that currently, you can only fight this villain once. This is really strange to me, and definitely brings down the grade of the DLC. The best comparison I can make is that this is like if you played the entire Taking Aim DLC as Kate Bishop, but then after you completed the DLC, you weren't allowed to play as her in post-game missions. And part of getting this new supervillain is being able to see them in other missions as well. Now, I've said many times I'm patient with the release of new content, but getting a new villain was supposed to bring new villain sectors. I would have rathered us wait a little bit longer than not get these villain sectors. The fact that the Super Adaptoid, a very visually appealing villain, can only be fought once is super lame. But to be fair, it looks like we're getting the Super Adaptoid in future villain sectors, which is really great to hear, but until then, it's a very lame omission. And speaking of until then, I'm kind of curious, once I time travel back to 1999, what am I supposed to do to kill time, you know? Oh, I could go to Toys R Us back in its heyday. Oh, that would be awesome. Man, I miss Toys R Us. Or I could go to Blockbuster back in its heyday. Man, I miss Blockbuster. At least Kmart is still around. Kmart is still around, right? So as I mentioned earlier, I didn't experience many serious bugs in my first 3 playthroughs of the main campaign. Only minor visual bugs appeared a handful of times. But Kate Bishop showed me a whole other side to this game. While bugs weren't constant, they were pretty frequent. The first bug I experienced was one where Kate would occasionally disappear after teleporting. You could still play the game just fine, but her character model would completely disappear, and she would return eventually, whenever she felt like, I suppose. Now, this was a really just like silly and funny bug when it first happened, but after a while it became very clear that this was going to be a recurring issue. This is just one of the problems with Kate's teleporting ability. And while I really wanted to look past this bug, there was no denying that this was preventing me from really enjoying Kate. Because of this disappearing act, I was either regularly confused or anticipating another disappearance. But that bug is nothing compared to the next one. The other bug that was far worse than the disappearing Kate was a progress-related bug that I ran into during the final mission. Essentially, for some reason, after completing the final mission of taking aim, my progress wouldn't save, meaning that I would have to replay that mission again. And keep in mind, that mission is at the very end of the story, and it is one of the longer missions in the DLC. In the end, only during my 3rd playthrough of this final mission did my progress finally save and allow me to watch the final cutscene. While I'm glad I was finally able to finish the DLC, it was super frustrating to have to start over so frequently at the very end. And it was sad because it definitely made me reluctant to even try playing that final mission again. In the end, bugs don't define a game to me. They are definitely embarrassing and hilarious blemishes on video games, but ultimately, if dealt with correctly, they are a temporary short-term problem. And hopefully the bugs I experienced were a temporary short-term problem. Kind of like the temporary short-term problem of me living in this current timeline before I time travel back to 1999 and visit Toys R Us before I stop Todd from ruining my artwork. 90s Toys R Us is the best. Plus, I could go back and buy all the toys that I couldn't buy when I was a child. I have the power of adult money and adult disposable income. No one would be able to stop me in the toy line. Moving on. So while the new outpost wasn't released in the Taking Aim DLC, I'd like to take the time to talk about it really quickly. First of all, I like how different the palette of this outpost is when compared to the anthill and the chimera. There are lots of vibrant greens and pale whites around this area. I think it's really important to have new outposts that look visually distinct, and color theory subtly helps with that, especially when compared to the dark reds and the harsh oranges of the anthill and the dark grays and blacks of the chimera. In addition, this outpost has some cool little areas like the shooting range that Kate eventually takes advantage of, and this little waterfall area. Again, I just want to say I love the greenery of this area. It gives a life that a lot of the other areas don't necessarily have. I also think it's really cool that you can interact with Maria Hill here. She's a character who's really important to the story of the game, but that we don't really get to see very often. And now we can just walk right into her desk and knock the papers off her desk and talk to her about the goings-on of time travel, which I'm sure she appreciates all of that. She's a very, very busy person, so I'm sure she appreciates all that. And while we're talking about new NPCs, I really love that Dum Dum Dugan is in this outpost. Now, it's not like he does much, but I'm a huge fan of the character, and I loved seeing his character model. I especially loved seeing his character model holding like an old wooden gun, just in the open at the outpost. I have no idea what their plans are for him in the future, but I hope that this is a hint at bigger things to come for him. Moving on to the mission locations in Taking Aim, the majority of the locations were in in the snowy tundra of Siberia. Now, I definitely liked these locations, especially considering Siberia was barely visited in the main campaign, but I will say that I'm excited to see newer locations on missions in future DLCs. The snowy tundra was great, but it already existed in the game, and it would have been cool to go someplace that we hadn't necessarily seen before. And on a side note, I really loved the time travel sequences and how that was slightly reflected in the environment. The differences between past and present weren't dramatic, but it was enough for me to be excited about the time travel story. And speaking of things being different in the past versus the present, now I'm starting to remember like every time travel movie I've ever seen, and I feel like maybe going back in time to save my piece of artwork might have more consequences than I initially thought. But this is like really important to me, you know what I mean? Like I have not stopped thinking about this amazing ant farm drawing that I did and the jerk who stole it from me. Now, I'm not a big fan of the more practical superhero costumes that we've been seeing in recent media, and that's definitely what they went for when designing Kate. I know some players are critical of the other characters in the game, like Steve or Widow, but I actually really like their designs. I think they mixed the best of both worlds, that fantasy and the realistic tactical work together really well. But I think Kate's canon skin has the least superhero design of anyone in the game so far. But that being said, I really appreciate that they created a design for Kate Bishop that is specific to their game. It's subtle, but the differences from her comic book counterpart make the character easily identifiable as the Marvel's Avengers version of Kate Bishop. Potentially more so than the main cast of Avengers, honestly. But luckily, there are various other skins that Kate can wear in the game, including my favorite Kate costume with the confusing hip holes. They're just like my pants that have hip holes. What are the hip holes for? I don't know. That's what makes them fantastic. Seriously though, this is a really well-rendered version of the costume, and I was really excited to see it. In addition, putting it at the end of the challenge card definitely motivated me to complete more challenges. I also like the crazier design implemented in the Kate skin with the arrows sticking out of her head. These are the kinds of striking skins that really draw your attention. I also wanted to mention the trench coat wearing Kate Bishop skin. This one's really gritty, and it kind of reminds me of the dream sequence from Batman vs. Superman. I've been having fun playing around with this skin recently. But when it comes to challenges, I did have a little bit of difficulty. Now, if you saw my full game review, you know I have issues with the daily and weekly challenges that the game gives you to play, but Kate's challenges are potentially my least favorite. Now, I will say it is possible that I just need to like get good and that I'm not a pro gamer enough. But I have the most difficulty with Kate's challenge card, and I enjoy these challenges the least out of all the other characters in the game. I want to stress again that as time has gone on, I think this might just be a me problem, but when I tackle challenges meant for Thor, I feel like I have an easier time completing them than I do with Kate, and I just wanted to say that here. But most notable about Kate Bishop's challenge card is the fact that it's the first hero card that you have to pay for. This challenge card will set you back about $9.99 USD, and honestly, I don't mind the price. Especially given the price of skins in the weekly rotating shop, $10 wasn't so bad to me. I will say that I wish there was a little more variety when it came to the rewards in the challenge card, but overall, I think the price is worth it, especially given the existing value in the marketplace. I mean, essentially, you're spending $10 for a handful of skins, when in the marketplace currently, you could spend anywhere from $9 to $14 on one skin. So given that context, I do think there's value here. If you play as Kate Bishop and enjoy her as a character, I'd say that this is a good investment. Before I give my final thoughts on taking aim, I wanted to give a couple of final suggestions for future Avengers DLC. First of all, as I said earlier, I'd love to see a single new enemy type introduced with each new DLC. And if you are including a new enemy, I'd like them to be hyped up as part of the marketing. And remember, you don't necessarily need new assets for these enemies, you just need to find out a new gameplay style for them to attack you with. Secondly, please delay content if something vital like a villain sector isn't going to be included with the DLC. I understand you want the DLC out as soon as possible, but I don't want vital features like the villain sector to be sacrificed to make that deadline. I'd also like to see more character moments in future DLCs. I really liked the attention that Kate Bishop got in Taking Aim. She is the star character after all, but I'd like to see the main cast of Avengers visited more frequently. I really thought Kamala Khan was missing from this DLC, but if I'm being honest, I want to see the other characters as well. And lastly, I'd love to see new locations with each new DLC expansion. Playing as a new character against a new supervillain villain in a brand new world. I think that's the perfect trio right there. But with those suggestions out of the way, I can safely say that I really loved the Taking Aim DLC. This was highly anticipated and delayed for a long time, and it's safe to say that it was well worth the wait. While the new aspects of Kate's gameplay is a little rough around the edges, she's a really fun and inventive character to play as. The story was over the top and bizarre, and it's what I'd like to see more from the game moving forward. And most importantly, the DLC provided fresh air for continued players. It's always great to get any new content, but getting a character as rad as Kate Bishop was super unexpected, and I hope we get more bangers like this in the future. And on a separate note, I've given up my plans for time travel because I lack ambition and I don't have the money or the intelligence to build my own time bridge. And I don't know who to steal it from, so I'm just gonna give up while I'm ahead. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. If you want to watch me play Marvel's Avengers and other video games live, check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram is at carrotscraps as well. Thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Fun fact about this little story is that it's completely true. In kindergarten, I drew a picture of an ant farm. I think I just like drawing mazes with like complicated rooms, and I walked away from my drawing, a drawing that I did actually consider to be like the best ant drawing that I had ever done. And someone in my class drew a Batman, not a octopus Batman, a regular Batman, all over it, and I got so upset that I was kicked out of practice that day for, we were having a graduation, and we were practicing like a song that we were going to sing at graduation, and I wasn't allowed to practice that day. And yeah, I was very upset by this, and it has lived in my memory forever. Funny story about the kid who drew the Batman. I mean, he totally, you know, there was no malice intent. For some reason, kid brain told them that this would improve the drawing, but later, years later, we became really good friends in a different school. And I don't think we ever even talked about this happening, but I knew it was him, and I held on to that secret in my heart. Thanks for ruining my ant farm with Batman. Batman does not make everything better. I think that's the most controversial thing I've said in any of my YouTube videos.